Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Pellavito. I'll be your moderator for today's show. In today's show, we're going to be discussing Kamala Harris, who is now the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, and her position as to what she's going to do to reduce or eliminate the national debt, or is she going to address that at all? And with that, we have a very special guest who's arrived, who wrote a very famous book, if you haven't seen it. We're going to bring him on first, called The Millionaire Next Door. If you haven't seen that book, it's all about frugality and how people become wealthy by watching their dollars. And of course, we have a group of people that don't watch their dollars, and that is Bill Denko. Bill, welcome to Economics. I just want to get your little insight before we get started. David has joined us. I'll bring him in just a minute. What do you think about this $35 trillion national debt, and what would the millionaire next door say about accumulating such a nice size?
Yeah, for the of course, millionaire next door is about individual behavior and a micro sense of how households accumulate wealth. Well, but also those households know that there's a limited amount of time they're going to be on this good earth, and so frugality becomes part of the mindset that makes a heck of a lot of sense, because one day you want to retire and live on your resources that you have accumulated. But look, the United States of America, we're now what, 250 years old or so plus, and we're supposed to be here for another 250, and it looks like we're going to be here into perpetuity. So the mindset is, with modern economic theory, it doesn't matter what the debt is. Well, the Roman Empire lasted 400 years. I don't know of any empire that has lasted into perpetuity. And so I think we're on a reckless course. That's it in a nutshell. We're on a reckless course with a nation that believes you can spend without any recourse. Is that enough?
That's a good start. And with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and see what Kamala Harris's stance is on the $35 trillion national debt. David, your thoughts?
Bill, good to see you. Nick, good to see you. The truth is, nobody really knows yet. Kamala Harris does not have an economic plan on her website. She's supposed to release one this week, but we do know a few things. First, the $35 trillion is just the tip of the iceberg. By the time this administration ends, they will raise the debt about the same amount that Donald Trump did. Neither one of them have been fiscally responsible. But most of Donald Trump's debt rise had to do with COVID. And some of the Biden-Harris administrations has to do with COVID. But a lot of it has to do things that don't have anything to do with COVID. Federal spending is 40% above pre-COVID levels, and COVID is over. The biggest thing I can say is that, the 35 trillion is what people focus on, but the real number is more like 125 trillion, because in addition to the 35 trillion, you have significant unfunded civilian and military pensions and retiree health care, off the top of my head, about 14 trillion. And you have about 78 trillion in unfunded Social Security and Medicare obligations. And there's some other commitments and contingencies. You can get all these numbers from the financial statements of the U.S. government and various other official government documents, including the Social Security and Medicare Trustees Annual Report. And so the real number is about $125 trillion, which is, quite a bit more than the 35 trillion, and growing faster than the economy. Last thing I'll say to start is Kamala Harris's past positions are clear. She wants to grow government. She wants to increase dependency on government. She wants to raise taxes in order to be able to pay for that, although the things that she's talking about doing won't come close to providing enough revenues to stabilize our debt to GDP at a reasonable level. She's for regulation, more regulation. So I think there's a pretty stark contrast philosophically between the two major candidates. One wants to reduce the size of government, and the other one wants to grow government. Both of them now are talking about not taxing tips, which obviously is not going to help our fiscal situation, and I would argue really doesn't make a lot of sense. It's more of a political ploy than it is an economic ploy. If that's what we're going to have the tax code saying, then I'd say don't ever pay me anything. Just give me a tip. We'll work for tips.
We'll work for tips. Yeah, that sounds like a very
we'll work for tips, and we can negotiate what the tip ought to be in advance to make sure that it's reasonable given the services provided. Bill, you'd probably go for that too, wouldn't you?
I certainly would. Like it, pay me in an honorarium. It's a tip, right?
There you go. It's a tip.
Well, yeah. Don't sell your books. Just say, give me a tip for my book.
That's right.
Well, of course, I mean, that's how many fundraisers at churches, it's a free will donation to the chicken dinner, so there's no accountability for it.
Right.
Well,
it seems to me, other than this show, that the whole economic sickness that we have out there is not being presented by major media. Although I saw, David, you were on USA Today the other day, but it seems to me that they tend to avoid this topic, but we don't. And with that, we're going to bring in some people that will not avoid the topic. First of all, we'll bring in David Kinder, because he's been waiting. He's a financial advocate, and his broadcast does a podcast. David, what are your thoughts? You've heard Bill Danko, frugal from the millionaire next door. David Walker wants to keep our country from going insolvent. What do your financial analysts have to say about this problem? Or do you guys ignore it like the major media and the political parties?
Well, I certainly didn't ignore it. Basically, 2 weeks ago, I did my podcast on this, and I invited an economist, Tom Hegna, who's very well known for the insurance and financial services industry, who definitely advocates for retirement planning. And we were talking about at the time, because it was interesting that week. Yes, the national debt, according to U.S. Debt Clock, topped $35 trillion. The same week, Trump came out and said, we're not going to tax Social Security retirement benefits. Now, I'm glad to hear that announcement, but no one was complaining about that necessarily. I'd like to see those limits increased as opposed to having been frozen for the past 40 years. I'd like to see them increased and then indexed to inflation. That would be a far more responsible way to manage that, because there's certain people that maybe they should be paying those taxes on their Social Security. I'm looking at where people place their wealth will determine how many more checks they're going to be writing to the U.S. Treasury. Where your money is more important than what it earns. That's one of the greatest things I've learned over the past few years. And I'm also concerned that a lot of financial advisors were really flocking to Roth accounts. Here's the thing about Roth. I predict, this is not in the tax code, not yet. I predict one day Roth will be treated the same way as municipal bond tax exempt income was in terms of Social Security taxation. They say it's income tax free. Well, no, it's not income tax free if you're counting it toward the provisional income calculation of whether your Social Security benefits become taxable. So all they have to do is change the provisional income, say your Roth account, your distributions, which are reported on a 1099 form. Let's put that onto the form. And then, you know what? Let's go ahead and make your Social Security means tested, that if you have enough other income, you don't get your Social Security anymore. I predict that is in the future. I don't know when it's going to happen. It's not in the tax code yet. I think it's going to happen any day now. And I would not be remiss to say that might be in a Kamala Harris backroom discussion. I would not put anything past her. She's one of the more radicalized on the left in terms of taxation. I wouldn't put anything past her, but I predict that that's the future.
Yeah, David.
Well, on Social Security, I think the right answer for Social Security is to not tax Social Security benefits higher than 50% of the benefit. And the reason I say that, if you look at the contributions for Social Security, 50% came from individuals. They didn't get a tax deduction for that. It's a straight tax. 50% came from employers. They got a tax deduction, but the individual didn't have income inclusion. So the maximum amount that ought to be taxed is 50%, and it ought to be income related. Right now, it's 85%. The other thing that's going on with regard to Social Security is there's something called Social Security offset. It doesn't happen that much anymore, but my wife happened to have worked for an employer that does have Social Security offset, which says that you can offset up to half of the Social Security benefit based upon an integration formula with a defined benefit pension plan. And, of course, defined benefit plans are not what they used to be. But that's another area I think you can look at. But look, government is very big on trying to be able to generate more money now and kick the can down the road. I mean, that's basically what a Roth is, right? But when you've dug a hole so deep that and demographics start catching up with you, something's got to change. And so that's why I say that income tax rates for individuals will never be lower than they are now. Now, individuals may not have to pay Social Security taxes, okay, if they're not, if they don't have wage-based income or self-employment income, and so they won't have to pay that. But simple math says that taxes have to go up, and therefore that means that we've been told all our life that we're going to pay a lower effective income tax rate in retirement than we did in working. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
Yeah. Well, one of our commentators say that the government is stupid and politically irresponsible, but I don't want to agree. But we have our panel waiting in the back. We're going to bring them in. Sasha Starr from Canada, Ken Calhoun, one of the founders of the network, Mark Lee, who's also on all the broadcasts, and Rick Rosner, who also has his own show, Naked at Night. But Rick, you have a comment for this.
Yeah, so if neither party cares about, fixing our budget problems, or maybe they care, but they're not going to talk about it. They have no good solutions. I don't think that we're going to fix it. And so one way to at least mitigate it is to grow our way out of it some. Like Clinton was the last president to try to deal with the deficit effectively. But he also was lucky enough to be in the first internet era where America went crazy. We all thought we were going to become internet millionaires by setting up a website. Well, we don't have presidents who are going to deal with this, but we can have technology save our butts a little bit. I looked it up. The world has 1.5 billion cars. 7 billion smartphones. That's new technology that's changed the world. Right now, the world only has 3.5 million industrial robots. Obviously, by the end of this century, we're going to have 1 billion robots. And if we make the US the place where the robots are built, then we can have huge economic growth. If we manage to just keep growing technologically, and maintain our technological superiority, we can make enough money that the deficit will be less damaging than it currently seems like it's going to be.
Sasha has a comment.
I would disagree with Rick in one sense that all these wonderful technical innovations Yeah, sure, they will take time. There will be many more companies that will fail than those that will be successful at implementing this new technology. And it doesn't mean that these companies that will be successful, they will pay their fair portion of taxes from their profits. Most likely they will not. Either they will be incorporated in foreign jurisdictions, like whether it's Ireland or Dubai or somewhere else, so it will not cure the problem. The only way how the problem can be cured, it's a recent Trump's proposal of creating national cryptocurrency fund, bitcoins, and if bitcoins will go up into $1 million per piece, then United States definitely will be able easily deal with this $35 trillion debts and more.
But one way to deal with a government that can't provide services because it's broke, or worse than broke, is to get rich and pay for stuff yourself. And if we can have a rich ass country off of technology, we'll have a bunch of people, some poor people who will have to be taken care of in some way. But we'll also have a ton of rich people who can buy their own medical care and buy the services that, a more solvent government might be able to provide.
I've got a question for Dave and our guests.
Oh, David's got it.
Let me make a comment, and then first, I think we have to recognize that we have to decide what do we want to focus on. Not all debt is bad. Sometimes debt can be used to win wars or to invest in things that end up generating a positive rate of return and benefit multiple generations. But to the extent that you have too much debt, and to the extent that your debt is growing because of current consumption rather than investment in the future, that's not responsible. And that's where we're at. We are growing our debt faster than our economy. So the real metric needs to be debt to GDP. It's too high now. It's projected to get much higher. Fastest growing expense is interest. We've already spending more on interest than defense. We're spending more on interest than we are Medicare. That is not sustainable. And so I think when we talk about the presidential candidates, we have to recognize reality. They're not going to get out there and talk about what are the detailed Social Security reforms that are going to happen. What are the detailed healthcare reforms that are going to happen? What are the detailed tax reforms that are going to happen? They can acknowledge that we have a problem, but they need to do a lot more than what they're doing right now. And here's what I advocate for. They need to acknowledge we have a problem and that we need to start solving it sooner rather than later. And they need to endorse processes that will enable us to be able to solve the problem. The first is we need a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as a percentage of GDP we can take on. That is pro-growth, which is, whether it's through technology or whatever else, pro-growth, but it forces the Congress to make tough choices with regard to the numerator. It doesn't say what those choices are. It doesn't say what the mix is between mandatory versus discretionary spending or revenues, but it does say you have to make tough choices, and if you don't, things will happen. The second thing that has to happen is we have to have a statutory fiscal commission that will engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, listen to them, make a package of recommendations that will be guaranteed a vote in Congress. And in that regard, I now advocate for two sets of recommendations. One set of recommendations that would save Social Security, that would make it solvent, sustainable, secure, including demographics, indefinitely. And the second one, which would be broader, would be focusing on getting our debt to GDP down to a specific level, e.g. 90%. We're all already over that and headed much higher, by a year certain, e.g. 2040, with mechanisms to keep it there. So what they can do is they can say, acknowledge it's a problem, acknowledge we need to do something about it, and support mechanisms that will get us there, and then they can end up working with more specifics after the election. They're just not going to get into too much specifics, but not to address it at all is irresponsible and unacceptable in my view.
Mark.
Yeah, Dave, just really quickly, go 2 questions because there seems to be some back and forth, and I'd also love to hear from our other guests, David and Bill Danko and everything. But I know that there's been some back and forth over the weekend about the role of the Federal Reserve. I know that Vice President Kamala Harris, who is now the presidential candidate, has said that she doesn't feel that the president should have that much role in their decisions because they're a separate agency, whereas Trump has said that he would like to be more hands-on, for lack of a better term. And then the second part of that question and everything is that I've heard that I think later on today or sometime in the next 2 or 3 days that Vice President or presidential candidate Kamala Harris is talking about laying out an economic agenda and an economic plan. I'm thinking it's going to be full of a lot of generalizations, but if it is full of a lot of specifics, doesn't that run a risk of allowing quicksand to happen? Because if she puts out too many specifics, then she can get attacked for what those specifics are and everything, depending on what she is proposing. And I don't know, because I'm not part of her campaign, what she's going to be proposing. But I'm just wondering, because I know a lot of times politicians like to speak in generalities, and I'm thinking that's probably what she's going to do as well. But if she gets very specific, which I know you've been calling for, that could run into some problems because some people might want to nitpick those specific things that she is planning. But I'd just love to hear both of y'all, all three of y'all's thoughts on that.
Well, let me come back and just repeat what I said. I think that the candidates need to acknowledge that we have a serious problem and we need to do something about it. They need to talk about what's a way forward. They can talk about their relative priorities. For example, Harris is clearly for more taxes as compared to Trump. Okay. Harris is clearly for more spending as compared to Trump. They can talk about, well, here's some areas that I want to spend, more money on. And clearly, Harris has talked about several things in that regard. She's talked about healthcare being one example. Trump has talked about areas that he wants to spend less money on. Okay, so one's for bigger government, one's for smaller government, one's for more spending, the other one's for less spending, one's for more taxes, the other one's for less taxes. But I don't think they're going to get into a whole lot of details for the reason that you said. And that is, the more details you get into, the more opportunity there is to criticize you. But to do nothing is unacceptable. So, let's wait and see what she has to say. But right now, I have a theme for candidate Harris right now. Kamala, chameleon, because she is reversing herself on many things that she has expressly supported in the past. And she's starting to try to, copy some things that her opponent is proposing, even the things that may not frankly make sense.
If she's smart, she'll announce a commission to save Social Security and Medicare. Then she doesn't have to announce any specific policies. It kicks the can, but if she looks responsible, and it makes the Republicans look bad because they're being criticized for wanting to cut Social Security and Medicare.
Well, hold on one second. Then we'll go to Kim. Both candidates have said they don't want to touch Social Security. And Rick, you're making my point. We can talk about the process. What we need a commission to deal with Social Security, and we need to deal with our broader financial situation. That's a way to be able to say it's a problem. I'm going to do something about it. And then they can say, well, I don't want to go get ahead of myself. The whole idea is to get the commission to go out there and engage the people and come up with recommendations. I don't want to undercut their work. All right. So you're making my point. I mean, that's what they ought to do. They ought to focus on process, but they ought to acknowledge that they're going to do something about it. By the way, if you do nothing on Social Security, you get 21% across the board cuts for everybody in 2033. So what has to happen is the media needs to push these people to say, all right, if you don't want to do anything, that means you're for a 21% cut across the board. And then they're going to say, oh, no, I'm not for that. Well, then what the heck are you going to do? Then that comes back to, okay, we need a commission, whatever. But right now they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, and that's not acceptable. I'm sorry, Kim.
Well, I just want to point out for centuries, we've let men run this country into the ground. Men who don't know how to do a budget. Okay. They're clueless. They never had to and won't have to when they go home. They don't have to think about budgets for their home, their businesses. That's not their mental state of mind. Their mental state of mind is politics or whatever games that they need to play. Some of the things that I've been pointing out are, what goes on when they try to distract you over here with a bunch of clown acts. Well, you got Congress making laws to protect their assets with the PPP loans, which should have never been issued in the way that they were to begin with. That created trillions of dollars of additional debt that never got paid back. I believe that if you want to cut back on the spending, you also stop giving tax cuts to the wealthy. Trump gave over 40% tax cuts to the wealthy, according to David Kay. So, I mean, and I trust what David tells me, but those things don't help us. And, then you go, oh, we're going to tax them to make it look like you're hurting them. You're not, because it doesn't touch them with the tax cuts they get. Do real live taxing, flat rate, make it very minimal. You don't have to have it real high if it's flat rate across the board. Don't really tax people on Social Security or people who need the money that they're getting. But if you do a flat rate, then you're not doing all of this crazy math and taking money away from the country that we really need. You can then take and spend it on the things you need. You don't need all the agents processing it and bullying people. You can use them to process and unfortunately bully the people who are here undocumented that need to be processed. So there are many ways that we can really adjust things. But I think until you get control of how you're taxing people, what the tax cuts are, which I think if you eliminate that completely, then you have eliminated the debt that is accruing daily. And I think that Powell, if he has the power to say we're going to lower the mortgage interest rate whenever I want to, then he should have done it a long time ago and to help the people who really need it today.
All right, David.
Well, let's touch base on several things here. One, the Federal Reserve has been mentioned. Okay. Let's talk about how we got where we are and what the role of the Fed is. We got excessive inflation because we spent too much. And we had a supply chain problem, but excessive spending created a supply and demand imbalance. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates too low for too long. They bought a vast majority of the trillions of dollars in new debt that was issued both during Trump and during Biden. The Congress and the president followed the modern monetary theory during 2021 and 2022 by saying that debt doesn't matter as long as you can borrow in your own reserve currency unless until you have excess inflation. It caused excess inflation. All right. The Fed had to end up increasing interest rates to try to get inflation under control. We brought inflation down from the peak of 9.1% to 3.4% roughly. But prices are up dramatically since the beginning of the administration, 20% minimum, and much more for food, gas, energy, and housing and insurance. And that's what people are feeling, okay? And so, the Federal Reserve should really only focus on two things. Number one, pro-growth. How can they help growth? And secondly, how can they help to provide stable prices? I heard just within the last few days, one of the regional Federal Reserve presidents say, well, we're focused on unemployment. The Congress made a mistake back several years ago by adding a third charter dealing with unemployment. That's not the Fed's job. The Fed is to promote economic growth and to provide stable prices. Irresponsible fiscal policy makes that very difficult, but the Fed cannot deal with employment beyond promoting economic growth because employment has more to do with education, immigration, technology, and other things that the Fed has absolutely nothing to do with. So, the president should not be telling the Fed what to do, but the president and Congress should work together to revise the Fed's mission, okay, to focus on pro-economic growth and stable prices over time. The other thing is that the Fed also charter has to be revised to provide extreme limits on their ability to self-deal in our own debt. They basically ended up buying trillions of dollars of debt without having to go to the market. They shouldn't be able to do that. That's self-dealing. We shouldn't be doing that. That's short-term gain, long-term pain. And that's the whole path that we're on right now. We're on short-term gain, long-term pain. Debt going up, savings going down. Bill, you know this. That's the opposite of what you need for a better future.
Yep. We'll bring in the millionaire next door and see what he has to say about this increasing debt problem.
Yeah, no, David, I think you're right on target. We're on a path of no return here. Maybe these are the end times. I don't want to be draconian, but what culture has survived on this path in the past? When you look at the demise of, like Victor Davis Hanson's historical perspectives about the rise and falls of cultures, economics plays a very large part of it. And so why are we going to be any different? I mean, I hate to say that these are the end times, but what are we going to do to reverse it? There's too much inertia in the system right now. Can it be reversed?
Well, Bill, let me just come back on that real quick. As you know, my latest book is America in 2040, Still a Superpower ?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes the point that you're talking on is that if you look at history, the number one factor to become a superpower is economic power.
Yes.
That is the leading indicator. And the leading indicator to lose superpower status is economic decline.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't put your finances in order, you will have economic decline, which will have a serious adverse effect. And let me remind you of what happened to the Roman Empire, which lasted 1,000 years, only half of it as a republic and the last half as an autocracy. It fell for several reasons. See if these sound familiar. Fiscal irresponsibility, political instability, moral decline, overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Do those sound familiar?
Yeah, indeed they do.
We need to learn from history. We need to learn from others, and we need to wake up, change course if we want our future to be better than our past. It's not too late, but we're late in the ball game.
Okay. We'll bring in Rick Rosner, see if the High IQ Society can
Well, all right.
find our
So
way out of this.
we don't necessarily have to completely disappear like the Roman Empire, but we could easily go from being the greatest nation to being a great-ish nation. You look at Italy, you look at England, you look at Spain and Greece and all these countries that at one time ruled the world. Now they don't, and they're all pretty nice countries. Would great, but they're not important countries so much anymore. And it would be a shame if the U.S. fell to even, second tier status.
Yeah, but it looks like we're moving that direction. Let's go to the Financial Advocate podcast, David Kinder, see what you have to say out on the streets. What do people have to say about this issue when you bring that up to your clients?
Here's the thing. People are very much concerned, and they want to know, what are we going to do to fix this thing? And I've got a really good friend, and he's in Dubai. The neat thing about Dubai is they have their own national product, and they have absolutely zero taxes at all at any level whatsoever. Now, can we as a country get enough of the right kinds of people? And when I had Tom Hegna on, he said we need better statesmen in Congress that have a greater impact and greater ideas. We need kind of an Elon Musk type of a person who could bring in this higher level of thinking that can help bring about some new imagination to our fiscal problems. I don't know who that's going to be. I don't know what that's going to look like. I just know that there needs to be a solution. The question that I help my clients with is, see, I do not have a fiduciary responsibility to the federal government other than anti-money laundering and things like that. I got to follow the laws. But other than that, my job is to help protect the client. How can I protect the client from losing their life savings, life's work, and everything that they can because of other people, and that they're not held to a fiduciary responsibility of how they propose their spending? How can I be? I've got to be better than the government is. I have to advise better than the government is doing in how they're spending. I've got to do better for the client, and so that's my whole goal. You see, my tagline is the tax exempt wealth guide. Let me show people how to retire without even having to file a tax return, using the tax code and the IRS's own rules. That's what I love to talk about.
Yeah, I had a quick question for David, the financial planning guy and everything, because I've seen a number, I'm here in Durham, North Carolina, I've seen a number of restaurants that are running into problems, and it's kind of based on what Rick was talking about, because a lot of people have gone to remote work, so they are not having as many people that are coming down to their restaurants and everything, so they are facing a severe problem because they're not having the clientele come in there. And with gentrification, there's also been a lot of growth, and then there becomes a whole traffic issue and that whole thing that can also hinder business as well. So as a financial planner and one that probably plans even for some businesses, I was wondering your advice to folks that are in that crisis, because I did see one of the gentlemen wrote that it's like 80% of American businesses are having cash flow projects, and some of the cash flow problems, and some of those are beyond their control. So I was just wondering your take on that.
Well, I have personal experience with that because my father ran during 2020, and actually up through it was the first job I was fired from at the age of 13. But he ran the Orange County Courthouse cafeteria in Santa Ana, California. Right. And here's the thing: when the courthouses began to reopen again, everything shut down and everything was closed for like 6 weeks or whatever. When everything reopened, here's the thing: it used to be everybody shows up for jury duty like at 7:30 in the morning in the courthouse, and you got like 600 people waiting in that room. Well, they started staggering the people showing up. So you'd have 200 people, and then they have them at different times, which actually declined the foot traffic because people would eat on the way. And so that business really took a hit. Now, unfortunately, most other businesses, what they were able to do is they created their apps. They got into the food delivery services. I can't think of them all right now, but Uber Eats and things like that. Ain't nobody going to order no cafeteria food from the courthouse cafeteria to have it delivered to you. I'm sorry, that is not a palatable message. Right. So my dad tried what he could to try to bring up business. After about another 6 weeks or so, he said, "That's it, we're done." So he retired a year and a half before he planned to. He was 68 years old. He wanted to retire when he was 70 to maximize his Social Security. Restaurants and such, especially restaurants, we have to think outside of the traditional box. You've got to embrace those food delivery services. You got to have a great idea to bring that out. And one of my favorite shows is, Restaurant Impossible, Kitchen Nightmares, and things like that. You've got to get into a higher level of thinking and creativity. You can't keep doing things the way you were doing in the past. So whatever that looks like, and every business needs to do that. Every business has to fight for relevancy, because everything changes all the time. And if you're not fighting for relevancy, everybody else is. And if you're not, your days may be numbered.
So one thing technology doesn't necessarily destroy jobs as much as it replaces good jobs with crappy jobs. Uber driver, OnlyFans naked lady models. We have 1.1 million private pornographers on OnlyFans. That's technology. So it's a tough thing. The Uber driver is not a good job when you do the math, when you figure out the cost of gas and maintenance. And so, restaurants, when they have to depend on food delivery people, it changes their business, and not necessarily in a good way.
Yeah.
A couple things real quick. One, the government is having a very difficult time getting people to come back to work downtown. So it reinforces the fact that a lot of restaurants and shops and everything else are having difficulty. Secondly, I ran GAO, as you know, for 10 years, and GAO had its own cafeteria, and that cafeteria closed as a result of COVID, and has not come back, since COVID, if you will. So, these are real world issues that people are having to deal with. And downtown Class A building space is never going to be what it was before. You're having all these conversions of Class A business, office space into condos or apartments or whatever else because, we're not going to go back to the pre-COVID situation with regard to work. I mean, you're going to have a lot more people. They're going to be, working some in their offices, but working remotely to a great extent. My personal view is that people ought to be able to have to work in person 3 days a week. Let them work at home a couple of days a week, but you lose a lot when you're not physically in front of somebody. And with all due respect to Zoom and StreamYard or whatever else, this is great when you're talking about people all over the country, all over the world. But when you're talking about people that are in the same geographic area, there's a lot that's lost when you're not there in person, with regard to the emotional intelligence and meaningful interaction, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to Canada with Sasha Starr from Canada.
Hi, I would like to question all of you about how relevant is this U.S. debt of $35 trillion to the election issue. Most people who will vote, they either don't care, don't know, or don't understand, or all three of that about national debt, and they don't give a damn about it. Now, those people who do understand, and those tiny minorities, let's think about something. Let's see one of the party which will win election, they will be able to decrease national debt from 35 trillion to 30 trillion. So there will be less payments to service the debt. How average American will benefit from that? None, zero, zilch. This is absolutely loser as election is concerned. As discussions, fine. If you enjoy the discussion, please yourself. Be my guest.
Well, let's talk about what has to be done for people to care about it. Okay. I think what has to be done for people to care about it is for people to understand how it might affect their own life. And let's talk about what's happened in the last couple of years. In the last couple of years, we've had a last 3 years, significant increase in prices, in particular with regard to food, shelter, energy, insurance. And everybody needs those things. Everybody needs those things, no matter what your level of income is. And so people are focused on that. But then you have to ask yourself, well, why did we have those increases in prices? And there are a number of reasons, but the primary reason is the government spent way too much money, and there was an increasing supply and demand imbalance, and as a result of that, we had inflation. So if we don't end up getting our finances in order, if we don't end up controlling spending, if we don't end up, getting our debt to reasonable levels of debt to GDP, so that our fastest growing expenses, not interest, which you get nothing for, okay, then things are going to get worse. They're going to get much worse over time rather than better. So people logically look at how's it going to affect me, and they also tend to look at, well, today. I mean, today, this week, next week, whatever. So you have to be able to help them understand some of our irresponsibility caused the problem you're concerned about today. And if we don't end up taking steps to be able to deal with the underlying problem, it's going to get much worse in the future.
Alonzo brought up an interesting point in the comments and everything. I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about that, because I kind of agree with him, because he brought up that a large portion of Black Americans or African Americans prefer the gig economy. I would argue to some degree that is because a lot of the African American community, and I'm a member of that community, are in service-based jobs. And so the gig economy is almost needed to make ends meet. And that's why I think you find a number of African American drivers in Uber and Grubhub and a number of those kinds of services, because they are trying to supplement a already struggling economy and everything. So that's my thought on that, but I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that as well.
Well, that makes sense. If you've, black people, unfortunately, historically have faced like, crappier job opportunities on average. So, when you're used to crappy jobs, the new tech-based crappy jobs look better in comparison.
To answer the question about the Federal Reserve, which is in the chat, the president should not have a role with regard to the ongoing activities of the Federal Reserve as it relates to setting interest rates, for example. However, the Congress and the president need to work together to reform the Federal Reserve, to be able to get it to focus on economic growth and stable prices, to get them out of the unemployment business. They can't do much about that. They can help promote economic growth. They must take steps to promote stable prices, but get them out of something that they can't really do much about and limit their ability to engage in self-dealing in our own debt.
David, can you talk for a second about fashions in economic theory? It seems like under Reagan, everybody believed in trickle down. And under, the first part of this century, everybody started believing that, monopolies aren't necessarily bad. Like, can you get people out of bad fashions in economic thinking?
Well, I personally think that competition is good, and competition is one of the things that's made America great. And then, that's why you have antitrust laws. But, that's a facts and circumstances to whether or not a particular company has dominated a market to such an extent that it's anti-competitive, if you will. That's facts and circumstances. I think, I think one of the real things that we have to think about is what are the founding principles of the country? And I would respectfully suggest that there are a number. For example, limited but effective federal government, individual liberty and opportunity, personal responsibility and accountability, rule of law and equal justice under the law, fiscal responsibility, intergenerational equity, and stewardship. Those are founding principles that made us great and that are timeless in nature. And then let's compare that to social state principles. Grow government, increase dependency on government, take control of healthcare, take control of education, don't worry about deficits and debt. That's how stark our choices are. That's how stark our choices are. And my view is that the real battle for America's future is not as much about Democrat versus Republican. For the record, I'm an independent. And by the way, now about half of the American voting population are independents for good reason. I think the real battle for America's future is philosophical. Who are we? What do we want to be today and in the future?
Hey, David, speaking of philosophical, there's something else that's going on that I've been noticing. I noticed it somewhat with the Olympics, but I've noticed it in general because, as you know, I'm in the event and entertainment space, not just here on Pod TV, but in my other jobs as well as being in the education space. And I'm seeing a lot of people that don't, because even Sasha talks about it in his investment show, don't necessarily understand that whole notion of doing investments that are fun investments and all along those lines, because you're seeing a lot of people that are going to concerts that probably can't afford the concerts, that are going to plays that probably can't afford the plays, and doing things along those lines, probably even going to sporting games that they can't necessarily afford. Because every time that I look at the stands, including some of these major concerts, they are full to the max, and there are a lot of Gen Zs and others that are spending that money. So I just wondered your take on that, because I'm thinking there's some people that are probably being fiscally irresponsible, if we're being perfectly honest, and everything, when they are spending money that they don't have and everything, but they want to enjoy the freedom of being out in the world now that COVID has been lifted and everything.
Two things. One, too much of our current economic growth is based upon debt-financed government spending and debt-financed private consumption. That's a fact. That is not sustainable. And secondly, I know Kim's evidently not still on, but for the record, I just want her to know that I know what a budget is. And for many years, I had a budget and I complied with the budget, in particular in the years that I was in government. Because the first time I went into government, I took a 75% pay cut to go into government. And the second time I went into government, I took an 85% pay cut to go into the government. And even though I've given over 20 years of my life to the government, I've spent more time in the private sector than the public, I don't get a single dime of pension or retiree health care from the federal government. So for the record, I'm part of the solution, not part of the problem. So, by the way, David, and even though I don't need a budget now, I do short-term and long-term planning, including tax considerations, including, what I want to happen with anything I have left over. How much of it is, for charity, how much of it is for family, etc. Right.
So regardless of who gets elected, can you get into the White House? Can you get meetings there to make the case for what you're saying?
It's right behind me. All I got.
I see that, but can you get over the fence?
All I got. Oh, I've been there. Look, yes, I've been to the White House. Look, what I'm trying to do, quite candidly, is I'm trying to get the candidates to focus on some of the things that we talked about earlier. We got a problem. It's growing. We need to do something about it. I don't expect you to get in all the details about what you're going to do, about how you're going to reform Social Security, how you're going to reform tax system, how you're going to end up reducing other discretionary spending. I don't want to get you in the details. I understand you can't do that. But you have to first publicly acknowledge there's a problem, and you have to support mechanisms that will get us to where we need to be. And I am happy to work with anybody, no matter what their political party is, who wants to do something productive in this regard.
So you're helping set up the third-party candidates debate. Are you going to make this discussion a big part of that debate?
The answer is absolutely yes. I mean, just so you know, there's a group called Free and Equal. They have sponsored several presidential debates. The major candidates haven't accepted, but the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitution Party, etc. We're trying to get RFK Jr. to agree to participate. It's going to be on September 18th in Los Angeles. Exact location to be determined. I'm going to be a co-moderator. We've already started talking about the questions, and I can assure you there will be questions on the issues that we're talking about. Oh, by the way, and there will be follow-up if necessary because somebody didn't answer the question.
David, this is Steve Lau. Just a quick insight. Thank you so much, as always, for this insight. I mean, what is it going to take to change the narrative? I mean, it seems like most Americans today just assume that everything is usual, right? We can print our way out of this problem. One thing Fareed Zakaria mentioned yesterday, which I thought was interesting, is that the Harris campaign is getting a lot of momentum, but unlike Hillary Clinton's campaign, there's not a lot of specifics. It's really an emotional campaign, one that seems to be working. But sooner or later, she's going to have to get down to specifics about the economy and things like that. Depending on how much of a bump she gets. Do you hope that the presidential candidates will get down to some specifics on the economy, on foreign policy, on things like that, and how much of a detriment do you think that is to the vice president as we get down to the final win? Because I know the media is anointing her that she's already won, but I think there's a lot of time left between now and November.
Well, first, I think that she clearly has gotten off to a very fast start. And I think the two reasons that she's gotten off to a fast start, well, three reasons. Number one, people are relieved it's not Biden. All right? They're relieved it's not Biden. Number two, a lot of people hate Trump. Forget about policies. They just hate Trump, right? So Biden's gone. Trump's still there. And some people say, well, she could be our first female president, and she's multicultural, diverse background, if you will, but she hasn't had to talk about policy specifics yet. And so I don't think you're really going to know how Kamala Harris is going to fare until after the debates, because so far she's just talked about generalities. And she hasn't been able to have to respond to tough questions with regard to what are you going to do. She hasn't been able to have to respond to, well, you've already done a 180 on several things that you said that you were for. Now you're not for them. Why not? And what caused you to change? She hasn't had to defend herself with regard to the situation on the border. And so I think that she's in a honeymoon period that will last at least through up until the first debate. And I hope we have more than one, because the American people deserve more than one debate. And the VPs need to debate too, although they're not going to determine who's going to win this. Keep in mind, the only thing that matters is the Electoral College. The popular vote doesn't matter. And right now, Trump still has a lead on the Electoral College, although it's not what it was when Biden was the candidate. It's clearly a very competitive race. My personal view, and this is not necessarily my preference, I'm just going to tell you my personal view. My personal view is if the election is ultimately decided based upon the difference in policies, Trump will win. If, on the other hand, the election is decided based upon the differences in personalities, Trump may lose.
Yeah. Great analysis. You got to join the team on CNN, David. Better than what we got out there now.
I used to be on there fairly regularly, and but I don't. That was when I lived up in the New York area, so it was easy for me to get down there. Yeah.
Here's what I want to add with one thing is that I don't remember if it was Nikki Haley or Tulsi Gabbard, one of them. They mentioned something about making a Social Security reform, and they talked about extending Social Security, the full retirement age to age 70. And there's all this uproar about that. And I don't think the American public really understands Social Security at all. Because when you claim Social Security is a different decision than actually retire, to retire from whatever you're doing.
Right.
And so there needs to be far more clarity with the American public. And I can't trust that they all understand the intricacies of what's already there. You can make all these broad-based things, but if they don't understand them and don't understand how the program currently works and what the real choices are, I'm not sure they're going to understand any type of reform that could be proposed and understand what is really being discussed.
David, that's why you need citizen education and engagement. Okay, absolutely critical. Let me tell you what 77% of representative groups of voters supported for Social Security reform. Okay, number one, double the taxable wage-based cap. So you're taxing earnings at a much higher level, but you're not eliminating the cap because the tax rate is much, much higher. Okay. Secondly, increase the replacement ratio of the benefit for people near the poverty level, reduce it for upper middle income and upper income, but don't turn it into a welfare program. In other words, don't fully means test it, if you will. All right. So make it more of an anti-poverty program, if you will, but not fully. Thirdly, gradually increase the normal retirement age, but not the early retirement age, another couple of years over a couple of decades. All right. Fourthly, look at the cost of living index to make it more reflective of cost of living for seniors rather than the total population, because it's very different. Okay. And fifthly, add a supplemental individual account savings on top of a solvent, sustainable, secure, defined benefit system for people who don't otherwise have an employer-sponsored program. So those are the kinds of things that people supported in a way that would make it solvent, sustainable, secure, indefinitely. Base defined benefit, supplemental savings if you don't otherwise have a vehicle that you can use. And you're right, most people don't understand how it works, and most people don't think about how our economy has changed. We're not in the industrial age anymore. Most people today are working in jobs that are really more intellectually oriented than they are manual labor.
David,
And we're looking forward to the debate on, I guess it's September 18th, David, when they're actually going to show that there's more than just two parties in the United States, because the two-party system looks like it has failed us big time. But with that, we're out of time. Speaking of time, I want to thank our panelists in the United States from around the world, also the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, and Bill Denko, the author of The Millionaire Next Door. And we'll see you next time on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.